If I want to spend the night out, I don't owe you an explanation, my girlfriend said before vanishing until morning. I said nothing. I paid my half of the bills, cleared my things from the apartment, and left one note beside her spare key. 2 weeks later, she played my voicemail for our friends to prove I abandoned her until they heard what she had said first. My name is Ethan. I'm 31. I work in logistics, nothing glamorous, but the kind of job that pays consistently and doesn't follow you home at night. I was with Sarah for 3 years. Sarah is 28. About 11 months ago, she got a promotion junior brand manager at a mid-size agency downtown. I was proud of her. I told her that. I still think it was a real achievement. We'd been sharing an apartment for 2 of those 3 years. My name was the primary on the lease. I'd put down the first and last month's deposit out of my own savings when we moved in. Sarah contributed the throw pillows and a Monstera plant she found on Facebook Marketplace. That's not a complaint. I'm establishing the picture. The apartment ran because I made it run. Auto pays for utilities. Lease renewals handled. Grocery runs on Thursday evenings. I made dinner most nights not because I was asked to, but because I wanted to, and because I was good at it. When Sarah got the promotion, I expected things to shift a little. New role, longer hours, new people. I didn't expect everything to stay exactly the same. What I didn't see coming was the way things started feeling different without anything being said out loud. About 6 months after the promotion, she started canceling plans more often, not always with explanations. She'd come home late, or not come home at all, and mention it the next morning like a footnote. New names started coming up in conversation, people I didn't know, hadn't met, hadn't been introduced to. I noticed she was wearing perfume to come home to me. I told myself it was the job, the social side of the industry, networking, client events. I kept making dinner for 2, not because I was suspicious, because I still thought that's what you did when you were building a life with someone. Looking back, I should have asked myself who the second plate was for. I have to be accurate about that Tuesday night. I wasn't suspicious when I asked. I wasn't loaded up with weeks of grievances looking for a reason to explode. I was standing in the kitchen when she came out of the bedroom with her coat on, the camel-colored one she'd bought for what she'd called a November work trip, and I just asked, "Where are you going?" Not angry, not pointed. The same tone I'd use asking if she needed anything from the pharmacy. She stopped. There was a pause that went on just a beat too long. And then she laughed, not a warm laugh, more like the way you'd laugh if someone made an awkward assumption, and she said, "If I want to spend the night out, I don't owe you an explanation." I stood there for a second. Then I said, "Okay." I don't know what she expected. Based on the way she stood there for a moment after, I think she expected more. An objection. A question. Something she could push back on. I didn't give her anything. She left. I ate dinner. I watched something. I went to bed. She came home at 4. I heard everything: keys on the counter, water from the kitchen, the particular way the floorboards near the window creaked when she walked across them. I kept my breathing slow and steady and didn't move. She got into bed. She was asleep within 10 minutes. I lay there in the dark for a long time after that. I wasn't angry, exactly. It was something quieter than angry. I kept hearing the slight laugh in the way she'd said it, like I'd asked something mildly embarrassing, and I kept thinking about all the times I'd handed her a plate without being asked. All the Thursday evenings I'd rearranged, the car I'd taken in for service and never mentioned. She had just told me exactly how this worked. I just had to decide if the rule applied to both of us. I didn't sleep. I lay there and went through the last 6 months properly, and I stopped being able to tell myself it was just the job. The Thursday in September when I made dinner and got a text at 7 to 10 that said, "Don't wait up." I'd put her plate in the fridge. It was still there the next morning, untouched. The October weekend, she said she was at a friend's, and I realized I didn't actually know which friend. I'd thought about asking and decided not to. I hadn't wanted to be the person who checks. The way she'd roll her eyes sometimes when I asked about her day. Not dramatically, just slightly. The way you roll your eyes at a question you've heard too many times, except I hadn't asked it the day before. Names I didn't recognize showing up in conversation. J-Fire, I'd heard it once or twice in passing. Something about a campaign. Something about a recommendation. I'd assumed it was a colleague at the agency. The perfume she was wearing when she came home to me. At 6 in the morning, I got up quietly and went to the kitchen. I made 1 coffee instead of 2. I opened my laptop. We shared a cloud storage account. I'd set it up when we moved in, mostly for practical things. Lease documents, utility statements, expense receipts, the kind of paperwork that accumulates when two people share a life. I went in looking for the lease copy. I wanted to see whose name was actually on it. I was scrolling through the apartment docs folder when the thumbnails loaded. There was a subfolder I hadn't created. The thumbnail previews were screenshots from a chat thread. The contact at the top was saved as J Fire. I opened one image. I closed it. I sat there for a moment. Then, I closed the laptop, got dressed, and went downstairs for a walk. About 40 minutes, no particular direction. When I came back upstairs, she was still asleep. She hadn't put those screenshots there intentionally. We'd set up the account with auto sync on both phones. At some point, she'd screenshotted that conversation on her phone and it had synced quietly into our shared folder. She'd probably forgotten the account existed or stopped thinking about it the way you stop thinking about a utility bill when it's on autopay. She'd left the receipt in the filing cabinet. I went back to the kitchen. I made one coffee. That afternoon, while Sarah was out for what she'd called a Saturday errand, I texted Maya. Maya had been Sarah's closest friend since college. We'd always gotten along. She was at our housewarming, helped me pick out Sarah's birthday present once when I was stuck. I trusted her enough to ask one direct question. I asked if Sarah had stayed over Tuesday night. Maya took about 20 minutes to reply. When she did, it was careful. She said Sarah hadn't been there Tuesday. And then she added, "But Ethan, I want you to know I didn't really know what to think. She's mentioned feeling like you get weird when she goes out. I always thought you two seemed fine." I read that twice. Sarah had been talking to her friends about me. Not just venting, framing. Laying down a version of events where I was the one with the problem. Where my calm was control. Where my not asking was me getting weird. I thought about how many times over the last 6 months I'd said nothing when she came home late. No argument, no interrogation, no dramatic "where have you been?" I'd said nothing because I trusted her, and because I'm not someone who turns every inconvenience into a confrontation. But apparently, in the story she'd been telling people, silence looked like something else. She'd built the infrastructure for a narrative before I'd asked a single question. Before the Tuesday night declaration, the story was already in circulation. Sarah was finally asserting her independence from a partner who couldn't handle it. He got weird. He had a problem with her going out. That's the frame she'd put around everything in advance. Which meant when I eventually left, if I left, she already had the explanation ready. He couldn't handle a successful, independent woman. He controlled by going quiet. He ghosted because his ego couldn't take it. The thing about a frame like that is it doesn't need to be accurate to hold. It just needs to get there first. She'd gotten there first. I didn't follow up with Maya. I didn't send a correction. I just sat with what she'd said and thought about the fact that Sarah had been so deliberate about the story while being so careless about where she'd saved the evidence. That evening, I went back to the cloud account. This time, I wasn't scrolling through looking for something else. I opened the subfolder and went through the screenshots properly. I'm not going to pretend I felt nothing looking at them. I felt a lot. But I also want to be clear about what I was doing. This was a shared account, set up with my email, that I'd had access to for 2 years. The screenshots had synced from her phone through a setting she'd turned on and forgotten. I wasn't hacking anything. I wasn't going through a locked phone. I was looking at a folder in an account we'd both used to store our apartment documents. I took screenshots of what I'd found and saved them to a private folder on my phone. Then, I looked up the property management company's policy on lease transfers. I'd known from the beginning that I was the primary leaseholder. My name, my credit check, my deposit. Sarah was listed as a secondary tenant. I'd always assumed that was just administrative. It didn't mean much day to day. But it meant something now. I called the property management office Monday morning and asked about the process for removing myself from the lease and transferring primary tenancy to the secondary holder. The woman I spoke to was straightforward. I could submit a written request with a copy of my government-issued ID. They'd process the transfer and notify the secondary tenant. It wasn't a common request, she said, but it wasn't complicated. I told her I'd send the email that week. Wednesday night. Sarah had gone to sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and wrote the email. It didn't take long. I'd been thinking through what I needed to say for 3 days, so by the time I actually started typing, there wasn't much to figure out. I attached a scan of my driver's license as requested. I sent it at just past 11. I didn't tell Sarah. She hadn't told me where she was going Tuesday night, and I decided, somewhere between that conversation and that Wednesday evening, that if the rule was going to exist, it was going to apply to both of us equally. She had established it. I was following it. I want to be honest about where I was emotionally when I sent that email. I wasn't angry. I wasn't performing calm while secretly furious. I felt something closer to settled. Like a situation that had been blurry for months had finally come into focus, and I was responding to what was actually there, not to what I'd been trying to convince myself might still be salvageable. The apartment had been running on my name and my effort for 2 years. She had decided that arrangement came without any obligation to account for herself. Fine. I could work with that. Thursday, I texted Leo. Leo's an old friend, construction, owns a pickup. He asked no questions when I told him I needed help moving some things on Saturday. He showed up at 7:30 with coffees. We worked for about 4 hours. Clothes, books, the record player, the kitchen knives I'd had since before Sarah, the coffee maker, things that were mine before the apartment and mine throughout. I left the decorative plates she'd picked out from a market in the 3rd month we were together. I left the throw pillows. I left the emergency key I'd cut and kept in the kitchen drawer. I put my key on the counter. Sarah was out. She'd mentioned a Saturday thing earlier in the week, said it casually, without inviting me. She wasn't there when we loaded the last box. She wasn't there when we drove away. On the last trip down, Leo asked if I was going to leave a note. I said no. He picked up a box and we kept going. That afternoon, once everything was moved into the new place, a 1-bedroom, I'd started looking at the week before. I sat on the floor with my laptop on a moving box and worked through the accounts. Logged out of the shared cloud storage. Removed myself from Find My Friends. Canceled the shared Netflix. Closed out the joint expense tracking app we'd been using for groceries and household bills. I didn't block her on anything. That's something I want to be clear about. Blocking is a statement. I wasn't making a statement. I was just removing myself from every shared space. The same way you'd take your name off a utility account when you moved out, which is, in fact, exactly what I'd done. She had told me. No explanation needed. I didn't leave one. Her text started arriving around 2:30 in the afternoon. Hey, are you home? Then, 40 minutes later, why is your key on the counter? Then, Ethan. Ethan, what is this? Then 3 calls in the same hour. I read every message. I was sitting on the floor of the new apartment eating takeout from a place around the corner, and I read each one as it came in, and then I kept eating. Later that evening. You owe me an explanation. I set my phone face down and finished dinner. I know how that looks. A 3-year relationship and I disappear without a word. I'm not going to pretend that's a normal thing to do or that I didn't think about it. I sat with it genuinely. But she had told me, with a small laugh, that she didn't owe me an explanation for where she spent her nights. She'd been telling our mutual friends for months that I got weird when she went out before I'd asked her a single question. And I had equal access to a shared cloud account that contained evidence she'd apparently forgotten she'd stored there. I had applied her rule. She could work with that. About 2 weeks after moving out, I got a voicemail. I almost didn't listen to it. I'd been letting her calls go and assumed this was the same. Something made me play it. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the whole thing without moving. Her voice was unsteady, the particular unsteadiness of someone who's had a few drinks and decided that now is finally the time to make the call they've been composing in their head for days. She said she knew why I'd left. She said the J-Fire situation was something she'd been trying to figure out, and it wasn't what I probably thought it was. She said 3 years was worth at least a conversation. Then she said she'd noticed the coffee maker was gone. I stood there after it ended. She'd noticed the coffee maker. Not the 2-year lease I'd carried. Not the deposit from my own savings. Not the plate I'd kept warm on a Thursday in September when she'd texted, "Don't wait up." The coffee maker. I saved the voicemail. I didn't call back. 8 weeks after I'd moved out, I drove to the gym on a Tuesday evening around 7. Worked out, came back through the parking lot toward my car, and she was there, parked 2 spaces over, standing beside her car. She'd been waiting. I noticed that she'd had to wait. I kept walking to my car. She said my name. I turned around. "I need you to explain what happened," she said. "You just disappeared. You didn't say anything." I looked at her for a second. "You told me you didn't owe me an explanation for where you spent your nights. I applied that both ways. That's not the same thing. How isn't it?" She shifted her weight. "J-Fire is someone from work. It wasn't what you think. Okay. 3 years doesn't just disappear, Ethan. You can't make a decision like that without even talking to me. You told me I could." She went quiet. Then, "That's not fair." I looked at her. I thought about 3 years of what, exactly? 3 years of dinners she didn't come home for. 3 years of auto pays and lease paperwork and plates kept warm in the fridge. 3 years of being framed to her friends as the person who got weird about her going out by the person I had never once interrogated. I said, 3 years of what, Sarah? She didn't answer. I got in my car. She was still standing there when I pulled out of the lot. My hands were steady on the wheel. I noticed that, too. A few weeks after the parking lot, Tim texted. Tim goes back further than Sarah. He runs in some of the same social circles, which means he hears things. He told me Sarah had been telling people I ghosted her out of nowhere because I couldn't handle her being independent. And then he told me something else. At a gathering at a mutual friend's place, Sarah had played one of her voicemails. The idea, Tim thought, was to show people how much she was hurting, to make the case that I'd left her devastated and without reason. Evidence of her pain as evidence of my unreasonableness. It hadn't landed the way she expected. People had started asking questions. Why was she so certain he knew exactly why he'd left? The voicemail didn't sound like someone who'd been blindsided out of nowhere. It sounded like someone who understood very clearly why things had ended and was hoping he'd let her walk it back. Tim's exact text. She played it to show how bad she felt. I think it just made people start wondering what had actually happened. She'd used her own evidence against herself. The apartment was in her name now. The transfer had gone through within a couple of weeks of my email. She was covering the rent alone. I didn't know how she was managing that, and it wasn't my part of the picture anymore. I didn't reach out to Maya. About a month after the parking lot, Maya reached out to me. One message. 3 words. I understand now. I left it on read. Not as a point to make. I just didn't have anything to say that would add to it. I'd gotten comfortable with the quiet of not explaining myself. It turned out to be something I was good at once I started. I still don't know where Sarah is or how she's doing. I don't check. I didn't block her, but I removed myself from every shared space we'd occupied together, and the result is the same. She's somewhere I can't see, covering a rent she handles alone, living with a rule she invented that turned out to apply in both directions. I think about the Tuesday nights sometimes. The camel coat, the small laugh, the way she waited a half second after she said it, expecting something from me. She thought she was ending a conversation. Turns out she was writing the terms. I just enforced them. I'm out indefinitely. And for the first time in about 6 months, I'm sleeping through the night. QC checklist. Estimated word count to 4,000 words. Title promise held throughout. The verbal mirror, her rule applied back to her, is the structural spine, not a one-off line. Delivered in full at gym parking lot. Hook. Opens on the declaration with the half laugh, not preamble. Betrayal is concrete within the first 120 words. Reddit self-intro. Natural after hook. For context, age, job, relationship length, dynamic all land without literary prose. Pattern recognition. Clear 6 specific examples across the 6th-month window. Not melodramatic. Each incident plausible alone. Together, unmistakable. Antagonist double down. Present at least twice the declaration itself. Beat 1. The morning, after lie via text, home later X. And the J-Fire reframe at the parking lot. It wasn't what you think. False narrative. Fully established via Maya's reply. Specific language used. Gets weird. Pre-built infrastructure, not improvisation. Receipt, proof chain, cloud screenshots, auto-sync, shared account, his email attached. Lease removal email drunk voicemail. All 3 have natural origins. None is too convenient. Receipt breaks false narrative. Voicemail uses her own voice to confirm she knew exactly why he left. The ghosted for no reason story cannot survive it. Validation, witness, correct audience. Maya reverses without being recruited. Tim confirms narrative collapse. Leo present at move, but neutral. Gym parking lot is 2 people, proportional. Main viral set piece. Gym parking lot she cycles through 4 angles. He gives 4 short answers. 3 years of what? Is the closing line. She arrives with demands and leaves with nothing. Climax visible shift. She goes quiet after. You told me I could. The shift is her running out of angles, not a dramatic reaction. Iconic, comment lines. She mentioned the coffee maker. Not the 3 years. 3 years of what, Sarah? She thought she was ending a conversation. Turns out she was writing the terms. I didn't block her. I just stopped being somewhere she could look. Truth reveal, correct audience, her, alone, in a space she chose. No staged crowd. Proportional. Fallout. Practical consequence. Rent alone. Transfer processed. Narrative. Collapse signal. Voicemail backfires at Amanda's. Social validation. Maya reversal. Protagonist. Sympathetic throughout. Self. Aware. I know how that looks. Not smug. Longest speech at climax is 3 sentences. Hands steady controlled, not triumphant. Payoff proportional, clean boundary, lease transfer, digital vanishing, no note, realistic fallout, quiet validation, self-respect ending. No cruelty, no public humiliation engineered by Ethan.